Hello. General Hospital today will reveal. The latest spoilers from General Hospital have cast a sharp spotlight on the crumbling foundation of Harrison Chase's personal and professional life, as a single-pointed question from Tracy Quartermain may have set the stage for his moral unraveling, while Willow Tate Kane walks into a newfound freedom, perhaps even redemption. Chase seems poised to spiral toward a fate marked by betrayal, regret, and the painful consequences of suppressed emotional wounds. What initially appeared as a fleeting, awkward confrontation between Tracy and her grandson-in-law may, in retrospect, serve as the narrative's first crack in a deeper emotional fault line. Tracy's brutal honesty has never been in question. Her scathing critiques often land without apology. But this time, her words cut into something more sensitive than just police procedure or Quartermain pride. Her summoning of Chase for a personal inquisition, condemning him for his suspension from the Port Charles Police Department, and expressing doubts about his loyalty to Brooke Lynn, wasn't merely an act of concern. It was a mirror held to a man who has endured loss after loss, and who, for perhaps the first time, could no longer maintain the carefully constructed image of the dutiful husband, honorable cop, and stable Quartermain by marriage. Tracy's interrogation wasn't just a family affair, it was a public reckoning. Brooke Lynn's reaction was swift and predictable. Fierce in her love, loyal to a fault, and determined to protect the fragile framework of her marriage, she stood firm between her husband and her grandmother's suspicion. Her protestations rang with conviction, but one couldn't help but notice the trembling beneath her strength, the quiet fear that perhaps Tracy had merely voiced what Brooke Lynn herself had tried to suppress. When trust is tested within a marriage, particularly one founded after years of longing and heartbreak, even the smallest doubts can breed a storm of insecurity and reaction. And yet, the writing on the wall suggests that this storyline isn't merely a blip in the Chase-Brooke Lynn love story. It feels like a pivot point, especially when considering the growing whispers about Chase's future in Port Charles. Rumors circulating within the fan base hint at a major male character's impending exit, with speculation narrowing in on Chase as a possible departure. If true, the emotional turbulence unfolding in his personal life might be a preamble to his swan song. Chase, as a character, has endured one of the most relentlessly punishing arcs in recent years. His life has been marked by a series of escalating traumas, most notably the death of his father, the tragic loss of his brother, and the weight of becoming a guardian to his niece, only to later lose her. These griefs compounded just as he was on the cusp of joy, marrying Brooke Lynn, envisioning a family, and forging a path forward as a husband. But the revelation that Brooke Lynn had previously conceived a child with another man, his longtime colleague no less, at a time when Chase himself is struggling with infertility, shook the foundation of his self-worth. The weight of all this is not only unbearable but inescapable. No matter how hard Chase tries to shield himself behind his badge or hide within the structure of a Quartermain marriage, he cannot outrun the erosion of his identity. And that's precisely why the suggestion that he might stray from Brooke Lynn can no longer be dismissed as implausible. In a cruel twist of irony, Willow, whose own marriage to Michael has been scorched by betrayal and manipulation, now finds herself walking free of the emotional prison she's endured for months. Her path forward may be complicated, but it is hers to claim. In contrast, Chase appears trapped in a maze of loss, uncertainty, and suppressed bitterness, which may soon explode into reckless choices, should the writers decide to push him into the arms of another woman, perhaps even Willow. It would not merely be a dramatic flourish, but a culmination of long-simmering emotional chaos. Chase and Willow have shared a past that was never properly resolved, and their emotional connection has lingered in the periphery. With Willow newly untethered and Chase at his most vulnerable, the conditions are ripe for a mistake that could burn down what little remains of his moral compass. Of course, this arc may not be about redemption or even destruction. It may be about escape. The fatigue etched into Chase's recent appearances, the stilted dialogue, the increasing sense of detachment, all these may be narrative devices used to slowly usher him out of Port Charles. Perhaps this isn't about infidelity or emotional collapse at all. Perhaps it's about withdrawal, about closing a chapter in Chase's life where he has simply given more than he has left to give. After all, How much can one man endure before his spirit, like his storyline, demands a reprieve? Still, it's difficult to ignore the sheer amount of pain that has been funneled into Chase's world in such a short span of time. From personal betrayals to professional setbacks, from the isolation of infertility to the disillusionment of realizing that even love cannot heal all wounds, Chase is a man drowning in quiet suffering, and suffering has a way of finding an outlet, often destructive, always transformative. In the days ahead, General Hospital fans may witness either the moral collapse or quiet exit of a man who once stood as a beacon of integrity. Meanwhile, Willow's release from emotional captivity adds another layer of bittersweet tension because as one character finds the light, another may descend into the dark. The question is no longer whether Chase will fall, but how far he'll go before anyone reaches out a hand, and whether by then he'll even want to be saved. Willow could hardly comprehend the words echoing through the courtroom when the verdict was read aloud. It was as if time momentarily froze, her breath caught in her throat, and the world around her dulled into silence. The jury had spoken. She was free. No prison sentence, no chains of guilt, no more relentless accusations hanging over her like a storm cloud waiting to break. For so long, she had prepared herself for the worst, bracing for a verdict that would sever her from her children, her life, and whatever remained of her peace. And yet, in a stunning moment of grace and justice, the system had given her back her life. Tears flooded her eyes, not just out of relief, but disbelief. Willow had endured months of psychological torment and public scrutiny. Her choices had been picked apart and distorted, used against her by those who had never truly known her heart. Prosecutor Justine Turner had made sure of that, turning the courtroom into a theater of suspicion where every word, every pause, every memory Willow shared was painted in the most damning light. But as Justine sat frozen in stunned silence, processing a verdict that shattered her narrative, Willow's tears became a silent rebellion, a declaration that truth had prevailed. Despite everything thrown against it, she had expected to be taken away in handcuffs that day, not handed back her freedom. Her legal team had been cautious, never making promises, never feeding her false hope. The pressure, the fear, the burden of imagining her children growing up without her had nearly broken her. But now that she stood on the other side of the nightmare, Willow felt a profound wave of gratitude welling within her. Gratitude not only for her freedom but for those who had carried her emotionally when she could barely stand. Gratitude for the people who had believed in her even when she couldn't find the strength to believe in herself. And while Drew Kane may have assumed he'd be the first person Willow would thank, the truth was more complex. Drew had supported her in his own way, offering strength when he could. But his support had often been clouded by his own needs, his own guilt, and the unspoken tension that had lingered between them since everything fell apart. His love had been conditional, sometimes performative, tied more to preserving an image than nurturing her truth. Willow saw that now, with a clarity sharpened by survival. And while she wouldn't forget Drew's efforts, she knew they were no longer enough. Instead, two names stood out in her heart with unwavering reverence: Alexis Davis and Harrison Chase. Alexis had been more than a legal advisor. She had been Willow's voice. When she could barely whisper her own, the seasoned attorney had faced down the prosecution with fearless poise, crafting arguments that not only defended Willow's actions, but painted the full emotional portrait of her trauma, her fear, her humanity. Alexis hadn't just told the court that Willow deserved freedom, she had reminded everyone why. Her tireless advocacy had made the jury see beyond the surface, beyond the headlines, into the fragile, complicated reality of a woman fighting for her life. And then there was Chase. Willow would never forget the moments. He had risked everything to stand by her, testifying in her favor, pushing back against fellow officers, and refusing to be silent when others questioned her morality. He had put his career on the line, but more than that, he had put his heart in her hands again, even when she no longer felt worthy of it. In the darkest moments, it was Chase's loyalty that had anchored her. He had never demanded anything in return, never sought recognition, but had simply shown up time and again with that same quiet strength that once made her fall in love with him. And in the silence after the verdict, as Willow wept, Her eyes found his in the gallery, and in that shared glance was a universe of emotion, relief, gratitude, history, and perhaps something even deeper. Now that she had her freedom, the question of what came next lingered with both excitement and uncertainty. Life after an acquittal was still life in the shadow of trauma. She had lost so much time, reputation, trust, and rebuilding would not happen overnight. But now that the prison doors she feared had remained closed, Willow could dream again, could begin to hope for something more than mere survival. She could begin to want. What she wanted, though, was still forming in her heart. Could she dare to wonder if Chase's unwavering support meant there was still a place for her in his life? Could the bond they shared, scarred and reshaped by time, transform into something new? They had been through love, heartbreak, estrangement, and now redemption. Was it possible that, after all they had endured separately, they might rediscover each other in a world where the past no longer dictated their future? Willow wasn't ready to answer those questions just yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never forget what Chase had done for her, and what Alexis had given her a chance to walk away with her dignity intact, and her future still hers to shape. And as she took her first steps out of the courtroom, the echoes of gratitude still humming through her chest, Willow felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: hope. Not the fragile, desperate hope that clings to what might be lost, but the strong, quiet kind that believes something new can still begin, even after everything. Even now, Dante Falconeri had always prided himself on being a man of discretion, someone who knew when to speak up and when to keep silent. But recently, that line seemed to blur, particularly where his longtime colleague and friend Harrison Chase was concerned. It began innocuously enough: an offhand remark to Brooke Lynn about Chase's extracurricular investigative work, the kind of side project the department frowned upon, but had learned to tolerate in small doses. Yet Dante hadn't just mentioned it in passing, he had laid it out in detail, dropping breadcrumbs of concern laced with passive judgment, and perhaps a trace of jealousy or resentment. It wasn't entirely clear what motivated him. Was he attempting to build a bridge of understanding between Brooke Lynn and Chase, or was he intentionally planting a seed of doubt? Either way, the effect was the same. He cracked open the door for suspicion to enter. This wasn't just about a job. Beneath the surface, Dante seemed increasingly uneasy with Chase's relentless pursuit of something he couldn't quite define. Maybe it was justice, maybe it was redemption, or maybe Chase was simply trying to anchor himself after months of emotional and professional upheaval. But to Dante, it felt like a betrayal of the department, a defiance of protocol, and worst of all, a kind of righteous rebellion that Chase hadn't earned. After all, in Dante's eyes, the badge came with responsibilities not just to the law, but to the institution. And anyone who stepped outside those lines, even with good intentions, risked weakening the very system they claimed to defend. What made it worse was Dante's own proximity to the Corinthos family. He had long walked the delicate tightrope between being a cop and being Sonny's son, and now, Michael's actions threatened to unbalance everything. Chase had grown more and more fixated on exposing Michael, convinced that he was at the heart of something deceitful, something that extended beyond protecting Willow and veered into territory far more personal. The moment Chase began hinting at Michael's culpability, Dante's discomfort grew, and with it, his loose tongue. There's no doubt that Dante's latest confessional to Brooke Lynn had less to do with friendly concern, and more to do with drawing a line in the sand. He painted a picture of a Chase obsessed, a man whose moral compass had become skewed by grief, betrayal, and the need to matter. To Brooke Lynn, the revelation was shattering. The man she married had always been a model of restraint, someone who placed honor and clarity above all else. But now, if Dante's account was to be believed, Chase had become consumed by a vendetta, one that could no longer be justified. As a crusade to protect Willow, what struck Brooke Lynn hardest wasn't just that her husband was targeting Michael, it was that he might be doing so for reasons that had little to do with justice. The lines between duty and personal resentment had blurred, and suddenly, Brooke Lynn had to question what Chase's motivations truly were. Was he seeking the truth, or was he responding to the emotional chaos that Willow's case had unleashed in him? Willow, meanwhile, had been slowly rebuilding her life after the verdict that set her free. She had been humbled, transformed, and cracked open by her experience, and she now looked at the world, and the people in it, with a different lens. Her gratitude toward Chase was sincere and deep, especially after he had risked everything: his badge, his reputation, and his friendships for her. But gratitude is a powerful emotion, and in the absence of romantic clarity, it can morph into something else. Admiration becomes attraction, loyalty becomes longing, and in the tender, broken places where two people have survived something terrible together, emotional boundaries can easily fade. If Willow's continued presence in Chase's life offered the kind of validation and affection he hadn't felt from Brooke Lynn in weeks, especially if Brooke Lynn pulled away after Dante's warnings, then the perfect storm would begin to brew. Chase, already on edge from professional scrutiny, would feel misunderstood and isolated at home. Brooke Lynn, reacting to Dante's revelations, might close herself off further, and in that emotional vacuum, Willow's open gratitude, her visible admiration, her quiet reassurance that he had done the right thing, might begin to feel like the only truth that mattered. Would Chase cross the line? He had once sworn he never would. But the Chase of today was not the same man who made that vow. He was tired, wounded, and emotionally adrift. In a world where nothing seemed stable, not the law, not love, not even his identity as a husband, Willow's presence could be the temptation that breaks him. Because sometimes, the smallest acts of appreciation can feel like salvation to a man who has spent too long being taken for granted. Dante might not have intended to become the spark that ignited the fire, but his inability to stay quiet, his need to frame Chase's actions as reckless rather than principled, might be what pushes Brooke Lynn and Chase further apart. And if that happens, it won't just be a marriage in trouble. It will be the unraveling of one of Port Charles' most stable pillars, a once reliable cop turned suspect in his own downfall. What's coming next in General Hospital may not be a loud explosion, but rather a slow erosion of trust, of restraint, of lines that should never be crossed. And as always, the most devastating betrayals begin not in grand decisions, but in quiet moments, whispered doubts, and the aching need to be seen. As the dust settles in Port Charles, the lives of those entangled in this web of justice, betrayal, and emotional reckoning begin to shift in irreversible ways. Willow walks free, but the price of that freedom is still being tallied not in courtrooms, but in hearts. Her gratitude, raw and sincere, drifts toward those who never wavered: Alexis, who fought the legal battle with unrelenting focus, and Chase, who risked his entire identity to protect her. Yet the closer she leans into that gratitude, the more dangerous the emotional undercurrents become. What begins as thankfulness may evolve into dependency, and that dependency could blur the very lines that once defined who she was: wife, mother, survivor. Chase, too, stands at a precipice. His commitment to truth and his fierce loyalty have always been his armor, but lately, that armor feels like a cage. He is pulled in too many directions toward the woman who still believes in him, away from the woman he vowed to cherish, and into a crusade that threatens to consume him. Michael is no longer just a man with secrets. He's become the embodiment of everything Chase resents: privilege, manipulation, impunity. If justice becomes personal, can it still be called justice? Brooke Lynn watches the man she married slowly morph into someone she doesn't recognize. Each word from Dante chips away at her certainty. Is her husband protecting someone vulnerable or punishing someone powerful? Is his devotion to Willow an act of heroism or a symptom of emotional betrayal? Brooke Lynn's silence, once a sign of trust, now teeters on the edge of quiet withdrawal. And Dante, perhaps unwittingly, perhaps not, has lit the match. By speaking out of turn, by framing Chase's actions in a light of recklessness rather than righteousness, he shifted the tide of perception. Whether motivated by loyalty to Michael, frustration with Chase, or his own unresolved conflicts, Daddy's words may become the wedge that splits a marriage, the whisper that redirects a life, the doubt that seeds a disaster. Now, all eyes turn toward what comes next. Will Chase fall under the weight of expectation and temptation? Will Willow confuse freedom with fate? Will Brooke Lynn fight to hold on or let go before she breaks? Will Dante keep speaking, even as his words become weapons? Port Charles has seen many betrayals, but perhaps none quite like the ones unfolding now, quiet, intimate, and irreversible. Because sometimes the most dangerous storms don't arrive with thunder. They creep in silently through open doors, unspoken thoughts, and truths too painful to admit until it's already too late.